True. So tonight our presenter is Cody Norman, and he's going to be talking about Action Mailbox. And he is an independent Ruby on Rails consultant, and he's been working in Rails for about 10 years. He's also helping mentor early career developers with an organization called the Agency of Learning, and helped with the inaugural Rails World Conference, conflicting with Rocky Mountain Ruby last year. And, so we don't blame him for that. But
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
We're looking forward to his talk. Thank you for joining us, Cody.
All right. So first, I just want to say how happy I am to be in person, in a room full of Ruby people, even if there's not Ruby people in here, just people in general. I live out in Bailey, so talking to people is not something that happens very frequently for me. So I'm very excited for this to happen. This is also kind of an early version of the talk that I'll be giving at RailsConf this year. They just announced the schedule, so I will be Thursday at 11, I think. Kind of an interesting set of occurrences there. I'm the third person with the last name of Norman presenting that day. There's a whole track of them. So I'll be ending the Norman morning on the last day of RailsConf. But if you are planning on coming to RailsConf, this will probably be a completely different talk by then. I'm an incessant tinkerer, so there'll be lots of new stuff. But that's not to say this is half-baked. I really latched on to the whole Action Mailbox framework for whatever reason, and hopefully I can share some of this love I have with you all tonight. So, I really love email. It's a powerful, flexible way to be able to allow users to interact with your application. It's something that's been around for 40 plus years. So most people who are going to be interacting with your app probably have a pretty good idea how email works. So honestly, maybe I'm in love with the idea of email. As I'm standing here in front of you all lovely folks, I'm getting buried deeper and deeper in emails. I'm sure you all are too. But within that sea of emails that just get fired away every day, there's little nuggets of very valuable information in there. Little updates, status, these smaller things that are very focused, that keep you from having to check an app, open a page, and just let you know that everything is okay. So, reason number one, why I love Action Mailbox. Your users are probably using their email exponentially more than your app. I believe there's a lot of stats out there. The most enticing one that I pulled and cherry picked for this talk is the average employee checks their email every 37 minutes. So every 37 minutes, your user is going into a channel that they could potentially interact with your app with. I think this is a great different channel to kind of leverage these fun, creative, and really small focused solutions that can either add new functionality to your app or just layer a little bit of additional functionality and kind of nice things to have around some of the existing features that you have. So we're going to go over what Action Mailbox is, how you can get started, and then how the process actually works for sending inbound emails to your application. That's both on production and development. So Rails has a great way of handling that. How the inbound emails are processed and how you would actually deploy it on production, and a couple of ways that I have shot myself in the foot. So hopefully you don't have to. So this is a little snippet from the current version of the Rails docs. I think there's a open pull request right now to change these. So this is a little bit in flux, but this is kind of a general idea of what Rails or Action Mailbox is. It's basically a set of inbound webhook controllers that are kind of specific to your email client. So one for Postmark, one for SendGrid. And the inbound emails are routed asynchronously with active job. So once your Rails app receives the inbound webhook request, it is going to create a inbound email record and then add it to the queue to be processed later. So this is kind of the overall map of what happens whenever you send an email. So looking over everything, these examples are specifically dealing with Postmark. So the gray box represents your user sending an email from their phone, smart fridge, whatever. The yellow boxes would represent your email service provider. I'll use that term throughout the talk. I think that's a little more intuitive than the Rails term, an ingress. But anytime you see ingress, that is what Rails is referring to. These red boxes are where Rails actually takes over. So there's really only a couple steps before we get everything into Rails and let Rails handle things, which is great because that allows us to leverage our logs, debuggers.
When you say inbound webhook to Rails, is that just configuration of the webhook? So it's like putting a URL that points into your Rails app? Is that what that means?
Yes.
So your ESP needs to support like a webhook.
Yeah, and I think that is probably part of the reason why there's only a handful of specific providers. SES is notably missing from there because of their whole system for sending emails, which I think is great. I think they have a pretty wide variety of options, and it's one thing that I really haven't had to mess with, which has been nice. But yes, they do have to support that, the URL, but that's also good because that allows us to kind of do some hacky things if we need to, like passing in an ngrok URL and debugging inbound emails that are sent live to local app. So breaking everything down, this would be your user sending an email to Postmark. Postmark is going to get the email, does its processing. I think there is an additional step you have to check to include the raw email data and the JSON payload that gets sent. And we'll talk about why that's important later. But basically this is all kind of driven by your DNS MX records. So anything that is going to get to your email service provider, it is going to forward it directly to that webhook URL, no matter what. So once it sends everything over, we're going to make the inbound request to Rails. And we're going to hit the middleware and controllers. So your URL is going to be using the basic auth. So we have the password here in the URL. This is what you would paste directly into Postmark or swap out with something ngrok related, and then just use the last portion for the inbound emails route. Okay, so this is where things start to kind of get interesting. Once we've received this request, the next thing Rails does is it creates this active record backed action mailbox inbound email. This is kind of the bread and butter of the whole action mailbox setup. And it's actually a really well designed class because one of the really nice things about it is it has an active storage attachment for the raw email data. So it gives you a great source of truth to reproduce all these weird things you're going to run into, weird headers, missing message IDs, reply tos, all this stuff that can happen. We have a great way. It's stored in active storage. We can pull this down. We can basically recreate everything really easy in our console, which I think is great. I'm very hands-on. So being able to pull down this actual inbound email object is a great way to kind of start picking apart some of the different layers that make up this sub-framework. Okay, so after the inbound email is created, immediately after it's created, it is added to the queue to be processed by active job. Active job is going to pick that inbound email up and it's going to route it to the action mailbox. It's going to hit the router, which directs it to its specific mailbox. That's where the actual processing happens. And it's a really familiar process. It's very close to just using a regular active job. So you have a single process method, and all of your kind of business logic is right there within that process method. So that was the part I just touched on. So once the inbound email makes it to that actual mailbox, we do the processing. The result of this is going to update the status for this inbound email record as either processed, delivered, bounced, or failed, I believe. So these different statuses are great because, for instance, like a bounced, lets Action Mailbox know that we don't have to continue to try to reprocess this mail. It's bounced, it's dead, and we kind of have it segmented from everything else. The inbound emails that do successfully get delivered, those are marked for incineration. So we will automatically delete these, including the active storage attachments from S3 or something like that, without having to kind of have these like scheduled cleanup jobs and like orphan records that sometimes happens. So we got the overall kind of workings of how everything is put together with Action Mailbox. So reason number 2 why I love Action Mailbox, getting started is really easy. Talking to people about dealing with inbound emails and Rails, it kind of puts a lot of people off initially because it's one of those subjects that if you haven't really worked with it, it seems very DevOpsy and like infrastructure heavy, and it's like I don't even know like where to begin. Like how does that even work? But you may be surprised. It works like probably any other Rails tool that you've used in the past. So like most Rails tools, we have a generator, and then that's going to create pretty much everything that we need outside of a mailbox, which also has a generator. And at the risk of oversimplifying everything, that's it. We have everything that we need to process an inbound email, and that's amazing. And just a handful of commands. So getting started is like anything else. We would just run the generator to install everything, and then run our rate task. So one thing to note, I thought I had this highlighted, but I did not. So one very important thing to point out here that has really burnt me a few times in the past is if you look at this, you may notice active storage is installed. And I kind of touched on that before, how the inbound email object has this active storage attachment that it uses to save this raw email data, but that's not something that is super intuitive from the get-go and can really shoot you in the foot. We'll talk about that more a little bit later, but the main reason is you're probably going to be using a disk service unless you update active storage. And if your web process looks up and tries to find the inbound email that's saved from your web worker that's actually running it, it's not going to find it. It's going to fail, and you're going to have one of those sidekick queues that just keeps growing and growing and growing. So that is an important thing that I feel like a lot of people miss. And for the actual migration, if we take a look at it, this is our main object here, and it is just a handful of lines. It's pretty intuitive. We can look at this just from right now and see that we probably have an enum with some different statuses there. We have our index, message ID, message checksum. Those are a little bit of Ruby mail magic for saving the email message ID, which is the official email spec of how they denote a unique email and link it to other emails. And this is how your email client knows if your message is part of a thread or a response to a previous message, or how to kind of display that altogether. So our application mailbox is automatically generated for us. You can see we have a kind of nice little commented out helper route here that Rails includes by default. So these use basically like a Ruby match statement. So it can be simple or complicated, but something along the lines of regex, which can get weird. But if you find yourself kind of really having to lean on that, Rubular is a great resource. Looking into matchers. So an example of that would be writing a regex matcher that breaks out your first and last name, so you can figure out what user it may belong to. Those are things that you'll end up needing eventually, but typically I don't really have much need for that because most of my apps that I've used it on usually only have 1 or 2 mailboxes, so it's not terribly complicated. But when it does get complicated, using this all option is a super handy method to basically force any inbound email to be delivered to that mailbox. So when you're trying to work out any issues or reproduce something, this just immediately rules out any type of routing issue. Yes, Dan.
Go back to the previous slide.
Mm-hmm.
What is something? Is that like the subject of the email? Is that like the
so I believe
sender?
Yeah, so I believe this would match on anything that has something in a to address. And I think it's all based from the to address because it's assuming that it needs to route this email specifically by the end destination.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Once it gets into the mailbox, you're able to do a little more kind of mail specific things like look at the headers, subject, all these different things. But this is kind of the main starting point. And also, it works very similar to your Rails routes. So it goes from top to bottom. As soon as it finds a match, it will route it to that email, which is nice because this allows us to kind of use the same pattern as like a catch-all or a 404 route at the bottom of our routes file. So if we don't have anywhere to route this inbound email, instead of just throwing it out into the ether, we could route this to an unroutable mailbox or do something where we could save it and kind of recreate it. So that's another really handy method. But basically, I try to write as little regex stuff as possible. If you want to write something super elaborate, it's up to you. But for me, it's never been a strong suit of mine, so I always just try to stay away from that as much as possible. Okay, and this is the generated mailbox. So this is what comes after running the generator. As we can see, we have the process method. This is where pretty much everything happens. And that's it. It's very similar to an active job, very straightforward. You can add different methods here within the same file, but keeping the context of everything happening within that process method is going to keep things moving smoothly.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, because this subclass is application mailbox, could we do like additional routing here if there were some, right? Like, does this also take that like routing?
No, I believe it's a mix-in the application mailbox that does the routing. I think it may be the same thing that the Rails routes use. But once it is in the actual mailbox, I don't believe there's any way to route that. But since you're in the mailbox, if say it got delivered to the wrong one, you're able to kind of lean on Ruby for these types of things. As long as you're able to kind of make the trail back to whatever user it belongs to or subject, you could just do it that way. Because the idea behind these inbound email objects is for them to be ephemeral. So they're not going to stay around forever. We have them, we need them, but as soon as we're done, as soon as this returns true, it's going to be marked for incineration and deleted. I think default is 30 days. So the intention is to, if this returns true, great, we're going to delete this out. So it tries to kind of stay closer to the active job pattern, so you couldn't go back and say, I wanted to run this other job. And that's more or less it. That's how we can process an email. We'll maybe not do anything too elaborate here, but in just a handful of generators, we have everything set up to be able to process these inbound emails. So, trying to figure out how to process the inbound emails, we have the Rails conductor. I tried to blow this up as much as possible, so I left out the header, which says this is the Rails conductor, but this is a don't have the URL pulled up, but this is something that Rails provides in your development environment. It is at a specific route that I have somewhere in this presentation. But this just gives you a very easy form to simulate sending an inbound email to your Rails app, which just takes so much out of the equation, makes it really easy and intuitive to use, and I think it's great. So for the Rails conductor, there's two options. We have form, and then we have source. Form is great. I feel like this will get you 80–90% of the way, most of the time. When things start to get a little hairy, you start to deal with headers and need to link threaded responses and do a lot more logic. That's where the source option comes in. So I don't have a slide of that because it's just a giant text box. But basically, if you were to go in your email client right now, right click and say view source, copy that, you can dump it directly in there, and it would be a very close simulation of sending that same email inbound to your Rails app. So this is great because things like Postmark, we can go into our email service provider and find these logs that we've sent and be able to pull that out, put it directly into our Rails development environment, and start trying to debug things. If you've ever had to try to debug production email issues, probably emailed a lot of your users. I know I have. It's one of those things where you always feel like just one or two keystrokes away from potential disaster. So this is a great way to try to firewall yourself from that happening. Okay, so reason number 3, why I love Action Mailbox. The source code is surprisingly approachable and intuitive, especially for something as complicated as email. And you may be thinking approachable source code, sure, like you've probably been working with it a long time, but I think it is very readable and it's pretty well laid out to the point to where we're going to be able to cover most of it in just a couple of slides. So this is our inbound email object. Again, this is kind of the bread and butter of everything that happens in Action Mailbox. I think it's awesome that this fits on one slide. I even have the headers up there too. So everything is right here. We're including a few different of these concerns here. Incineratable, we talked about that one. Message ID and routable. Routable is how we route these inbound emails from the application mailbox to their specific mailbox. And here is our active storage attachment. So we have this raw email attachment that is going to be sent to our Action Mailbox storage service, whichever one we have configured. The way this is set up, it looks like in theory, you would be able to have a different storage service for Action Mailbox than maybe the rest of your app. So say you wanted to just put everything to S3 because you're going to be sending a ton of emails. You'd like to use Google Cloud for your host app, or it's already in use. That should still be an option. But saving the inbound email as an actual file attachment, I think is one of my favorite things about it because it just keeps everything there and gives you such an easy way to kind of recreate these super hard to debug things when they do come up. So I think this was a great addition, but this is also the culprit why a lot of people may get burned because it's not super intuitive that there's going to be an attachment for your inbound email and not like an email attachment. So, besides that, we have our statuses. We kind of looked over those through the migration. We have pending, process, delivered, failed and bounced. Yes?
Sorry, this may be a dumb question, but how do you recreate? Like, okay, so this message didn't go where I thought it would go. I can pull down the raw file. I can look at it, I can debug things, but how do I restart the process with that raw file?
Right, so there's a couple of different ways. Since this is an active record backed object, we can just do something like Action Mailbox inbound email last or find it by ID. So that would be an example of that here. And then it really kind of depends on what we need to do from there. So we see here we can call source on it, which is going to actually download that email attachment file and return it as a string. So this is great. This is what we pass directly to the Ruby mail library that creates the mail object that you're going to be interacting with. So we can see here the mail method is just calling mail.fromSource, and this is just the attachment, and more or less they're just calling 2s on it. So that's one way to create it. You can pull the raw email source from there, upload it into your Rails conductor, or we would be able to do something. So for this example, I believe we could do something like inbound email, and then we could change the status to pending, and then manually process it. I think it's process bang or process later, something like that. But this gives us the option to walk back that status to something that, okay, we initially marked this as bounced. That's not quite correct. We fixed that, but we still need to reprocess that email. So you could update the status, which show as pending, and then manually process it or add it to the queue for reprocessing.
Thank you.
And if you're not familiar with the Ruby Mail library, it's a super powerful gem. It allows you to do a lot of things that you probably won't have to do, but if you need to do it, it's there. Things like, you know, multi-part emails where I need just the actual part of the text that's not wrapped in all the HTML, or pulling out attachments that may or may not be part of their corporate signature that's attached with every email. If you need something like that, it's here. So the Ruby Mail gem is where most of the stuff that you're going to need is at, and that's where you're going to be doing most of the business logic and the process now. Okay, reason number 4 why I love Action Mailbox. Processing an email is easy. As any senior engineer knows, we like to be a little bit hard to pin down, so that's why I had to put that in quotation marks. It's easy as far as email is concerned. There's a lot of things that can go on. There's a lot of weird clients out there, but for a topic that can be kind of opaque and complicated as email, I think Rails makes it very easy. So the actual mailbox, this is where the magic happens. We have our process method, and we also have the same lifecycle hooks available to us that are in active job. So before processing, after processing, around whatever. These are all available to us, and have a nice way to kind of check things maybe before we start processing this email. We'll take a look at that here shortly. Okay, so we touched on the lifecycle hooks a little bit. So there's also 2 extremely handy methods. Well, maybe one. I don't think I've ever used bounce now, but bounce with is super handy because as you can see, this will mark an inbound email as bounced, and message deliver later. This will accept a active mailer mail object or mail message to send to the sender of the email to alert them of the bounce. So we mark it as bounce, so we don't have to reprocess it. We also send an email back to whoever sent it, alerting them of the bounce.
And so what's the difference between bounce and failed?
So failed is this job didn't work. That's like the same kind of mechanics of like a sidekick retry.
Mm-hmm.
Bounce is, I don't know if it marks anything for the actual email service provider. I know some of them kind of have requirements, like how do you handle bounces. Mm-hmm. So it may be involved in that, but for my purposes, bounce marks it as do not process in the queue, but also sends this email back asynchronously to whoever sent it, letting them know, hey, something happened, maybe don't try this again. And if that did happen, we have our before processing hook to kind of ensure any kind of condition that we would like to check before we actually process the email. So this would be kind of a general example of, say, I'm expecting whoever sends this email, whatever email they're sending it from, is going to be an email for one of my user objects. So if we don't find this user, we're going to bounce. We're going to just send them a mail back, say, did you email us from a different account? Maybe this is whatever, but we don't have it. And this also keeps us from clogging up our queue with all these jobs that will probably fail. So this is a great way to kind of segment that, which is super important with email and keeping your delivery rates high, and also just keeps your database clean, as well as your S3 bucket and most of your job queues. So maybe a little bit difficult to see, but this is kind of like a general example of some type of practical application. So this would be, say, you're tired of explaining to people they have to upload a PDF or they have to upload a certain attachment and just email it to me. How about you just attach it and email it to me? So this would be an example of that, where someone is sending an email, they have an attachment, and we're going to create an active storage attachment on our end. This lets us do things like processing, uploading, creating different versions or variants, and we save it. And it keeps your user, this is a super common task that we're able to completely remove the UI from, and keep it within the context of two methods, which I think is great. And I think this is a good example of some of the creativity you can kind of use. There's all sorts of options. I think it really depends on what your users have the appetite for and what some of your pain points may be. But this is a great use case that I've used a few times and has drastically cut down on issue supports and even things like password resets. They don't have to reset their password. They're in their email. They just send it off. So I think this is a great way of thinking about the solution first instead of immediately going for software for things. So I think this is a great way to keep things flexible, focused, and just really simple. So reason number 5 why I love Action Mailbox. Deploying to production is pretty simple. It's like 3 slides simple. So I think that is a huge benefit and something that I wouldn't have expected initially. But I've deployed a handful of these apps to Postmark. Typically, the thing that takes the longest is for your DNS records to update. It's pretty straightforward. However, there are potential pitfalls. One, think about processing these emails in the same context as you would Active Job. Think about some of the same issues that you've ran into before. One being your default URL probably isn't going to be set. That typically happens in your application controller or maybe somewhere else in your stack that your app isn't going to hit. So if you're using things like routes or trying to find images, most of that is going to fail unless you specifically set it or just check to make sure it is set ahead of time. Number 2, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but you're probably just going to want to do something besides the disk service for active storage. For me, it's not worth it. If you have everything running, kind of in a single process, like some of the newer Rails apps are attempting to do, I think that may be more of an option. But say for now, if you take a typical example, running your Rails app on Heroku, we have our web process and we have our background process. Those are separate. So when your background process tries to find that attached image, it lives on your web process and it can't find it and it's going to fail. So things like active storage, that's going to let Rails know exactly what the URL is based on the specific environment and the requests coming in, give you all the nice timestamps and everything. So that's been a huge time saver. Just bite the bullet, set up something, some type of cloud provider. Number 3, probably going to want to route all your inbound emails through a subdomain. There is a lot of weird things you could break messing around with email DNS records, especially with how things are set up now with a lot of the DKIM verifications where you go on your DNS page, it's just a bunch of text records, and you're not really sure what's what, and I'm not sure which one you can delete, so adding more. And, so just keep it separate. That saved me a lot of trouble. I've taken down my business Gmail several times by messing that up. So starting out with, say, routing everything through a .inbound subdomain is a huge time saver and can help eliminate a lot of issues. So again, we kind of touched on ingress is what Rails uses for these email service providers. I kind of switched that around. I think this is a little more intuitive, but this is how they refer to them in the docs. And these are the options that we have out of the box, which I mean, honestly, this is a pretty good selection, more than I would probably expect to be maintained by the core team. But most of them are more or less just webhooks. So hopefully it doesn't change once some of the specifics are kind of added for each provider. But I think this is a great set of options that are provided to you out of the box, and they just more or less work. We'll take a look at that now. So for adding Postmark, we go into our production RP and we set our ingress to Postmark. The next thing we need to do is we need to generate some type of secure password that we're going to use to authenticate in that webhook URL. This is the example that the docs use, so this is what I've been using. So just something like secure random and then copying that output and using that as your key. So for using that as your key, you have two options. If you're using the encrypted credentials, you would just set that as, I believe, just Action Mailbox. Set it to this value, and Rails knows how to pick that up and check that against the inbound webhook URL password. The other option is using an environment variable that just needs to be Rails inbound email password. So as long as we have this output set to one of those two values, as long as we have the same one in our webhook URL, everything will be authenticated and we're good to go. So we're on Postmark, we create a new server, and then we would add our Action Mailbox webhook URL. So we can see the example here. Password would be that secure random password that we generated before and added to our credentials. Once this is added, one important thing, you need to check include raw email content in the JSON payload. The Rails guides do mention that, but this is something that is specifically required. Otherwise, you're going to see a lot of kind of odd failures because you're not going to be able to create that Action Mailbox inbound email record because we don't have the raw data payload coming from Postmark. So once you have that in there, they provide a nice check option. This just pings your server. If all is good, we see a little green box. But if it's bad, could mean one of two things. It could mean things aren't quite right on Postmark's side, but the other option is things aren't quite right on the Rails side, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because that means the request is making it to our Rails app, and now we're able to use our logs, use our debuggers, and be able to start kind of peeling back the layers instead of dealing with the black box of trying to figure out what's happening with your email service provider. So this is just a quick example of what it would look like if everything pinged correctly. So if you see this, you should be ready to go to set up these inbound emails. Well, almost. We need to update our DNS records. Again, tried to blow that up, but even Postmark suggests the same thing. Use a subdomain for the DNS records. This is their example. And that's it. We have a production Rails app fielding inbound emails, processing, resending them, whatever we need to. And more or less, it's a handful of generators. So I think Rails does an excellent job of really making a complicated and potentially very confusing solution feel very Railsy, which I think is great. And I love Action Mailbox. I wanted to share this with everyone. A lot of the people I've spoke to haven't really had much experience with it and just kind of write it off immediately because email is weird and it's pain to deal with if you've ever had to write an email that gets sent out. So I think it puts a lot of people off, but I also think there is a lot of power and flexibility that you can build into your apps in just a handful of lines of code. So that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. I do have some time for Q&A. I was not planning on doing that at RailsConf, so if there is anything you have questions about, let me know. Yes.
Are there any test helpers?
Yes, they do have a few test helpers. Honestly, I haven't figured out the best way to test these because I feel like it's one of the cases where most of the tests I'm writing are kind of duplicates of the existing tests already built around the inbound email object. I think any test that you would have to do would be in that mailbox in the process method. So kind of the same lines of the job. I just, when this is called, I want to make sure it's called with these arguments once, that type of thing. I don't know, once you get much more past that, I feel like you end up stubbing and mocking so many things that it's not a very good indicator that things are failing.
So you can't you don't have fixtures or anything for the Action Mailbox records?
Yes, I don't know if they're automatically generated, but there are a lot of great examples within the Rails source code, both for the source code and actually I've gotten a ton of use reading the source code from the Rails conductor because that's like a real practical example of let me send out a dummy email, which is probably what I need to do in development, and then do something and make sure everything was received and processed correctly. So that's where I've been pulling a lot of my stuff from. But for me, as far as testing, it's usually say hey, I want this to be called at least once when my mailbox is processed. So I haven't gotten much past that. But anytime that I have had to kind of dig for something, the Action Mailbox source code has been super approachable. Everything is right there, and I've been able to pull a lot of those examples directly into my host apps. Yes, Dan.
So I think one, and this is more just kind of a comment, like a way to improve your presentation, is I didn't even think about that file delivery mechanism as a great use case for this. Right, I think just laying out 3 or 4 use cases would make this a super strong presentation.
The same feedback I got last night too, but I didn't have time. I have a whole thing, but he was like, "Yeah, you should move that practical example 20 slides up." So we will get there, but thank you for that. But yeah, that was something that's I think if I dangle out hey, here's all the cool stuff you could do. Do this in a handful of lines. I think that entices people more than kind of going through everything. So this is kind of in that transition area where I reached out to Dan maybe 6 to 8 weeks ago and asked to get this talk prior to getting accepted to RailsConf. After I was accepted, I had to kind of update everything because I had a goofy title that got accepted, and now I have to kind of build the talk around that. But yes, I think, so I can let you all know, some of the sneak peeks, but I think one of the big pieces of feedback that I got is eventually we'll rebuild this whole talk around kind of walking through each one of those points on the slide and letting that kind of drive the narrative through everything and kind of staying in that context instead of jumping around as much here's the generators, here's the source code, here's all this stuff. But it is also difficult because I really like Action Mailbox, so I have to pump the brakes sometimes. But I think it's important finding the good balance. I do think it's cool that you can fit most of that source code on a single slide, and people are hey, I can read Rails source code now. I do like the idea of making that less intimidating to people, but also you got to dangle the carrot a little bit. But yes, thank you. Any other feedback on hit me up.
Related to dance form, like what's the most, I guess, maybe unexpected thing that you've done with Action Mailbox, or like an all hell yeah moment, like when something came together? Like that was kind of like along Dan's point, like inspired of, hey, here's how I did something specific, and I play with Action Mailbox a little bit. I share the same sentiment. Like I think it's a really powerful tool, and I like interfaces that are like kind of like data only, no web UI.
Exactly. So the attachment, that was something that I did build recently to kind of like get like a PDF intake document from people who were trying to upload, either huge files or not formatted correctly. And that drastically cut down the number of support requests and errors and a bunch of other things, especially for when your users may be in areas with limited to no bandwidth. So this just makes it a little more accessible to more people and a lot easier. But to answer your question, like a year ago, I was absolutely dying to do something with Action Mailbox. Whether it's cool or not is remain to be seen, but I thought it was really cool. But I built a horror movie streaming recommendation service called Screaming Recommendations. You could call, text, or email. So for the email, I just had one email address, so everything got routed to the single mailbox. And then you just included Netflix, Shudder, or Hulu in the subject. And I sent back 3 suggestions for movies that were available to stream. No opt-in to subscribe.
Right.
It's just a one-off, like I don't have to track bounces or unsubscribes because I know it's a valid email because I received one.
Right.
So that was a fun little thing where it just works. You don't have to do all this stuff, and it's just back and forth. I have some ideas of how I may be able to potentially work that in at RailsCon. So kicking around some of those things, but I think it's just a really great way to experiment and do creative stuff, and it's pretty low overhead as far as like getting started and sending real inbound emails. And that's also made easier. So for the example with Postmark, where we're adding that inbound webhook URL, we can literally swap that out with ngrok. It takes a little bit of kind of finagling on your Rails app side, but being able to send a live email from a real working email address and get that to my local development environment with the debugger open is like days worth of work saved and digging through stuff. So I think these things that make it feel very Railsy and comfortable, let you leverage a lot of the existing tools are some of the best things about it.
I'd suggest that at the start of your talk, throw up an email address and have it do something. Whether it's the horror movies or something specific to RailsCon.
Okay, so that was one of the suggestions. He was like, since you're not doing QA,
Oh, yeah.
so I may try to incorporate, instead of doing a QA session, like a live Action Mailbox thing where I could see the questions come in live as they come across.
Have it come up on your screen when you're.
I mean,
That's dangerous.
whether it's I think it'll be remarkable, and that's not necessarily good or bad. It's just it'll be something.
I have 2 questions. One maybe is out of scope for this talk, and one maybe they're sort of related. How is it actually safe to just check that from address, or are you like relying on like the SPIF records on like the sender to like know that actually, because like SMTP is like notoriously hackable with that. So like I could send a thing that says like, oh, this is from Cody, and like send in God knows what to your thing, and it's collected into your.
So for me, I generally default to them being safe because I think there is some processing that your inbound email or your email service provider does. Things like checking the from address matches the header from value, which is harder to spoof. Typically things that people don't look at. So different things to kind of link this up to make sure it is a valid email. And I think if it doesn't pass those steps, they'll typically, they'll like quarantine it and it'll be marked as pending.
Cool.
But for any type of situation where I feel like I really have to really confirm everything, that's when I start digging into the email headers.
Got it. Okay, and then maybe that's the answer to the question is kind of like that routing. So like if you think about like something like a HubSpot that has, it's like a CRM type of tool that you can forward a message to, they typically give each one of their clients like it's like a hash at like a.hubspot.com or whatever. Like are those routes, can those be dynamic? Or do you have to like send them into the process and then process has to pull that out?
Yes and no. So I think in the case of them being dynamic, you would have to use the regex matcher. So it returns the two different objects and you would choose which one. So in that case, that's kind of a common pattern. So you would take a regex, basically split your email by the dash and say, this last value is my UUID that's tied to some record that I need to find. That is how most of the ones I've used seem to work.
Yeah, sure.
However, I do have a client who's like, I like this, but it creates a new contact in my email client every single time. Can we remove that hash?
Oh, yeah.
So,
And Gmail will save that each as a contact too.
yes, exactly. That's exactly their issue. So it's like, yeah, I'm trying to like
My contacts.
email you, and it's like I have all these huge hash things. So.
And they all look the same too.
Exactly. So for this case, what I did is I created an inbox mailbox. So basically, I split apart the email address, formatted first, dot last, and do a few different steps. We have an email alias saved. So in theory, the first part of that email should match a column tied to one of our users, but that's best case scenario. Sometimes it's a little bit finicky, but I have found it seems like the main idea is if you can get it into a mailbox, then you could Ruby your way out of a problem.
Sure.
So that seems to be how I kind of lean on a lot of it. And it's not something that runs all the time. It's just a one-off and done type of thing. So don't really have to worry as much about like memory bloat or maybe these other things, changing state for other objects. So I think that's been pretty helpful too. Yes.
Yeah, I was kind of curious about how, so you said that the emails are actually processed asynchronously.
Mm-hmm.
Is that configured like the same as active job? Are you able to like put your support mailbox as highest priority or something like that?
Yes, I think it leverages all the same stuff as active job, and you're able to set queue priority. I think you would also be able to, actually, you can, I think I've had to deal with this recently. I think it sets a default queue in there, but you're able to do something like reopening the class and specify a different queue. So if you want super high priority email processing, or something that may even run on a completely separate worker process. If you're just getting inbound emails all day, it may make sense to kind of break that out to its own process. But it gives you all the same tools and lifecycle hooks as active job. So we could set our queue, we could set our active storage service to something specific. So all the nice Rails goodies that you have are also available here to either customize, augment, or kind of keep it separate from other parts of your app.
And that was at the point of the mailbox object that you're able to set that up?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
When is the book coming out about this?
It's funny you should mention that. I had a surprise meetup appearance last night due to rescheduling, but I was hoping to have a text and video course related to Action Mailbox that will be building a sample project afterwards. It is not quite done yet because I wanted to have a talk ready for all you lovely folks who are coming in person tonight. So people took the priority this week. But I did snag a really dope domain name. Actionmailbox.pro will be where it's at eventually. And we'll have something available to plug for RailsConf. I don't have a mixtape, so I have to come up with something.
No merch.
Yeah, no merch. Not yet. Anything else? Awesome. My personal website, that's one of the easiest ways to find me. I have all my other links on there. feel free to add me on LinkedIn, wherever you see this goofy face, you know, kind of the same except for Meetup apparently. But more than happy to help with any questions or anything. If anyone does want a copy of the slides, I can send that over to you, but I'm waiting to post them until they're RailsConf finalized. So this will probably change a little bit, but I'm always a sucker for, you know, kind of hanging on to these slides. So if anyone wants those or has any other questions, whether email related or not, please feel free to reach out. So thank you so much for having me.